2 hours after burying my 8-year-old son, my phone rang with a call that changed my life forever. His teacher's trembling voice could barely hold itself together as she told me, "Mrs. Davies, I've found something you have to see with your own eyes. Come to the school right now and meet me in the staff room. Don't tell your family or anyone else. This is dangerous." When I finally arrived at the school, the figure I saw in front of the door made me shiver from head to toe. I would never have imagined that the person who had the teacher cornered inside was my own husband. But before I get to that moment, let me start at the beginning. And as the narrator of my favorite true crime podcast always said, before the story begins, write in the comments from which town you are listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe so this story reaches more people. 2 hours after burying my son, Harry, the house felt like a frozen hell. The pungent smell of jasmine flowers and funeral wreaths mixed with the aroma of damp earth clinging to the bottom of my black dress. People kept coming and going from the living room, murmuring words of condolence that sounded hollow and distant, as if speaking from the bottom of a tunnel. They said I had to accept God's will, that Harry was now at peace in heaven. But none of those phrases managed to alleviate the pain tearing through my chest, as if someone were ripping it from the inside. Harry was only 8 years old. He was a healthy, restless child, always running around with an energy that infected everyone. The doctor had said it was a sudden heart attack, a very rare case, an anomaly. I didn't believe it, but I didn't have the strength to argue either. I retreated to my room, sat in a corner of the bed, and stared at the photo frame where Harry smiled proudly with a school sports trophy in his hands. Outside, my husband, Robert, received and bid farewell to visitors with red eyes, a swollen face, and slumped shoulders, as if carrying the weight of the world on his back. Everyone praised Robert's strength. They said he was an exemplary husband and an admirable father who stayed strong just to support his heartbroken wife. Through the half-open bedroom door, I saw him embracing Mr. Peterson, the chairman of the foundation where Harry studied. The older man patted him firmly on the back, offering comfort like a father comforting a son. That scene should have touched me, but something in my stomach churned, a feeling of nausea that I couldn't explain. It was then that my phone, resting on the duvet, began to vibrate. The lit screen showed the name of Miss Thompson, Harry's teacher. I frowned. Why was she calling me at a time like this? She had been at the funeral. I myself had seen her crying by the coffin. With a trembling hand, I slid my finger over the green button and brought the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was so low, it sounded like a whisper muffled by fear. Miss Thompson's breathing was agitated, as if she were hidden in a dark cupboard. She asked me to listen carefully, that what she was about to tell me she couldn't repeat twice. She said she had found something I needed to see with my own eyes, something that had been left forgotten in Harry's desk drawer. Her voice broke as she begged me to go to the school immediately and wait for her in the staff room. She emphasized a condition that chilled my blood. I shouldn't tell anyone, not even my family. She repeated that it was dangerous, that I couldn't trust anyone but her. I felt my heart begin to pound with uncontrolled force. The grief that had paralyzed me suddenly transformed into a sharp alert that cut through the fog of pain. There was something urgent, something dark related to my son. I felt it in the way Miss Thompson breathed on the other end of the line, in the contained desperation of her words. My mother's instinct, which until then had only found a wall of helplessness against death, ignited with brutal clarity. I wiped away my tears with a swipe, forced myself to stand up, and took a deep breath. I had to go. I had to know what this dangerous thing she had found was. I left the room, dragging my feet, feigning an even greater fatigue than I truly felt. I approached Robert, who was still talking to Mr. Peterson on the patio. I whispered that I had a terrible headache, that I needed to go to the corner shop to get my migraine medicine because I had left it in the car, and to get some fresh air. Robert looked at me with a tenderness that would have convinced anyone. He offered to go in my place, but I gently refused, telling him I needed 15 minutes alone to clear my head. Mr. Peterson smiled, recommending that I not delay, that the night breeze wasn't good for someone so weak. I nodded in agreement and headed towards my car. As I drove towards Harry's school, the city of London seemed to stretch endlessly. A fine drizzle began to fall, making the asphalt shine with the yellowish reflections of the streetlights. My mind was a whirlwind. What had Miss Thompson found? Why was she so scared? And why was she forbidding me to talk to Robert? Until that moment, he had been an exemplary father, attentive, patient, dedicated. I repeated to myself over and over that he couldn't be involved in anything dangerous. However, a small seed of doubt began to make its way through, slowly and stubbornly, like plant roots breaking through concrete. Scenes from the last few months that I hadn't wanted to look at too closely came to mind. Harry's stomach pains, his sudden fatigue, the afternoons he would fall asleep in any corner. I remembered how Robert insisted on personally taking care of his medicines, and how he would get angry when I suggested taking the child to another doctor who wasn't the family doctor, that distant cousin of Mr. Peterson who, according to them, knew Harry's history better than anyone. All of that, which until then had been just background noise, began to align in my memory like pieces of a sinister puzzle. The school looked eerie at night. The main gate was ajar as if someone had left it that way on purpose. I didn't see the guard in his booth. Maybe he was on a round, or perhaps there simply wasn't night service because classes were suspended after Harry's death. I parked the car far away in the shadow of a huge tree so that no one would recognize the vehicle from the street. I crossed the courtyard running under the drizzle with my heart pounding in my throat and headed for the building where the staff room was on the second floor. The corridor on that floor was completely dark, only lit by the faint light coming up from the outside gardens. However, I could distinguish a sliver of light escaping from the bottom crack of the staff room door. It was open a few inches. Miss Thompson must have been inside. I quickened my pace, but the closer I got, the more oppressive the air became. My whole body told me something wasn't right. The silence was so thick that only my footsteps, amplified by the tiles, could be heard. Harry's voice came to mind, telling me how kind Miss Thompson was, how much he loved her. If she had reached that point of fear, it had to be something very serious. I stopped in front of the half-open door and held my breath before looking inside. What I saw paralyzed my heart. Miss Thompson was cornered in a corner next to the filing cabinet. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide, and her whole body trembling like a leaf. She held up her hands in a gesture of supplication, as if asking for mercy. In front of her, with his back to me, stood a man in a black shirt whom I knew all too well. His posture, the way he shifted his weight to one leg, even the faint scent of his cologne escaping into the hallway, were unbearably familiar. The man held a small black object in his hand, a device that looked like a USB stick or a portable drive. He spoke to Miss Thompson in a low, threatening tone, a cold, sharp voice without an ounce of affection. It was a voice so different from the one I heard every day at home that for a second I refused to believe it. I pushed the door gently. The hinges creaked, betraying my presence. The man turned abruptly, alert, and the white neon light illuminated his face. My legs gave way, and I had to grab the frame to keep from falling. It was Robert, my husband, the father of my recently buried son. Robert looked at me without surprise, as if he had calculated the possibility of my appearance there from the beginning. His expression, which an instant before had been pure ice, slowly transformed into a mask of contained grief, the same one he had worn all day in front of family and friends. He disguised the black device, sliding it to his side, trying to hide it from my sight. I looked at Miss Thompson, who was now crying silently, her lips trembling, and her hands still raised. My mind refused to understand. Robert should have been at home receiving people, crying with me. What was he doing here? Why was he threatening our son's teacher? What was in that artifact that was so important? The silence became suffocating. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and Miss Thompson's slight, muffled sob. Robert broke the tension by approaching me with a calm step, like someone approaching a frightened animal wanting to calm it. His face changed again, becoming that of a fragile husband, broken by grief. He opened his arms as if to embrace me and, with a hoarse voice, said he hadn't expected me to come to the school, that he had only come because he couldn't bear to be home surrounded by memories of Harry. He claimed he had gone to collect the child's belongings, that he would put them away before the cleaning staff emptied the desks the next day. His explanation sounded reasonable, almost touching, and if I hadn't seen the scene a few seconds earlier, I would have collapsed into his arms without questioning anything. But the memory of Miss Thompson, cornered with fear in her eyes, remained etched in my brain. I sought the teacher's gaze. I needed confirmation, a sliver of truth amidst so many lies. Miss Thompson was trembling. Her eyes darted from Robert to me, as if she were at a deadly crossroads. When Robert glanced at her with that threatening glint I had never seen in him before, she hastened to nod. With a broken voice, she confirmed his version. Yes, Robert had gone to get Harry's things, and they were reminiscing about what a good child he had been. I knew she was lying. The cold sweat running down her temple, her fingers gripping the edge of her skirt until they turned white, betrayed her. Robert slid his arm around my shoulders and squeezed too hard, with an insistence that hurt. He said we should go home, that it wasn't good for me to be in a place that only reopened the wound. On the table was a cardboard box with Harry's drawings, notebooks, and some pencils. With an almost imperceptible gesture, Robert put the small black object in his trouser pocket. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I saw it clearly. Before leaving, he walked towards the door first. In that brief instant, Miss Thompson rushed towards me. She pretended to adjust my hijab, which was a little crooked from the rain, and her icy fingers brushed my neck. I felt her slip something inside the fold of the fabric at my shoulder. Her eyes fixed on mine. In them, I saw a desperate plea and an urgent warning. Her lips moved without emitting a sound, but I could clearly read the words she articulated: run. My heart raced. I forced myself to appear calm. I nodded as if thanking her for the gesture and took a step back. Robert turned, watching us with some suspicion. He asked what we were saying. I quickly replied that Miss Thompson was just asking me to be strong, to pray, and to take care of my health. He seemed convinced. He took my hand, and we left the room, leaving Miss Thompson alone in the silent room, rigid as a wax statue, about to melt from the heat of fear. The car journey back was a ride towards an invisible execution. Robert drove with studied calmness, wiping his eyes occasionally, like someone drying tears. He played classical music at a low volume, the same he usually listened to when he wanted to relax, but to me it sounded like the funeral march of my own destiny. I sat in the passenger seat watching the rain hit the window harder and harder. I felt the folded paper in the fold of my hijab as if it were a burning stone. I wanted to read it right there, but I was afraid Robert would notice. I glanced at him. The man I had been married to for 10 years suddenly seemed like a complete stranger. I mentally replayed the last few months. Harry's complaints of stomach pain, his sudden weakness, the long naps that were not normal for a healthy child, and especially Robert's insistence that only the family's trusted doctor could treat him. Something horrible was taking shape in my mind. Upon arriving home, the atmosphere was calmer. Most of the mourners had left. Only a few family members remained, clearing chairs from the patio. I said I felt dizzy and needed to lie down. Robert offered to make me hot tea, but I replied that I just wanted to sleep. I went into the room, locked the door, and leaned my back against it, trying to control my breathing. I waited until I heard his footsteps move away towards the kitchen. Then, with trembling hands, I pulled out the small paper hidden in my hijab. It was a sheet torn from a school notebook with hurried, almost illegible handwriting. I read it under the dim light of the bedside lamp. Harry did not have heart problems. They changed his medicine for low doses of poison. Check the teddy bear in his room. He recorded something before he died. Be careful, your husband is dangerous. My world collapsed instantly. My knees buckled, and I let myself fall to the floor. My child, my little Harry, had not died of a mysterious illness. He had been slowly poisoned, and the one who had done it was in my kitchen making tea, pretending to be a devastated father. The unbearable pain that had torn me apart until then transformed into something harder and sharper: rage. My tears dried up instantly. I understood that crying could wait. What couldn't wait was the truth. I got up as best I could and tiptoed out of the room, heading for Harry's room, which was next to the master bedroom. I opened the door carefully. The smell of baby cologne and infant cream still hung in the air, so familiar that it tightened my heart. Everything was as he had left it. The building blocks on the floor, the superhero posters on the walls, the storybooks scattered on the bedside table. On the bed sat his large brown teddy bear, the one he hugged every night to sleep, the gift I had given him 2 years earlier for his birthday. I approached the bear and stroked its soft fur with trembling hands. I noticed something strange on its back, a somewhat thick seam, as if someone had opened and closed it hastily with clumsy stitches. I remembered that at school he had been taught to sew and that he sometimes practiced with his toys. I went to the desk, opened a drawer, and took a pair of nail clippers with a small metal file. I returned to the bear and began to carefully unstitch it. Among the white fiber filling, a small digital recorder appeared, a spy toy my friend Julian had given him some time ago. Harry loved playing detectives. I felt a chill as I pressed the play button. Harry's voice sounded weak and hoarse, very different from the cheerful one that usually filled the house. My tummy hurt again today after Daddy gave me the red medicine. It tastes very bitter, not like the one Mummy gives me. I'm scared to tell Mummy. Then Daddy gets angry like that time. Daddy says it's a super vitamin to make me strong, but I feel worse and worse. The audio continued with the sound of a door opening and heavy footsteps approaching. Then I clearly heard Robert's voice talking on the phone with someone. His tone was calm, almost bored. "Don't worry, Mr. Peterson. I've already increased the dose. The boy won't last until next week. As soon as he dies, his grandfather's inheritance will be released into the guardian's account, which is mine. Then we'll split it in half as agreed. You just make sure the foundation's property papers are ready to change hands." The recording cut off. The silence in the room became deafening. I covered my mouth with both hands to stifle a scream that struggled to escape. Everything was spinning. My husband, the man I had shared 10 years of my life with, had poisoned our son to get the inheritance money my father had left in Harry's name. And the respectable Mr. Peterson, chairman of the Educational Foundation, was his accomplice. They were monsters, not men. At that instant, the doorknob of the room began to turn. Someone was trying to enter, but I had locked it. "Clara," I heard Robert's voice on the other side. "Why is the door locked? Are you in there? Open it." His tone was no longer that of the sweet husband. There was hardness, suspicion, a veiled threat. He knocked on the door insistently. "Open it, Clara. Don't make me break it down." I backed away, clutching the bear and the recorder to my chest. I was trapped. My son's killer was on the other side of the door, and the most terrifying thing was that he knew I already knew his secret. The banging on the door became brutal. Each impact made the pictures on the wall vibrate. Robert screamed my name, with a voice disfigured by rage and panic, a roar that mixed desperation and cruelty. I knew that as soon as he got in, my life would be hanging by a thread. Robert was no longer my husband. He was a cornered animal, willing to destroy anything that could betray him. I put the recorder in the inside pocket of my tunic, the only thing I now had to demand justice. I had to find another way out. The door was out of the question, only the window remained. Harry's room was on the second floor. I remembered the mango tree that grew next to the house, with its thick branches that came quite close to the small balcony of the room. More than once I had scolded Harry for daring to climb it. Now that childish mischief could save my life. I ran to the window, unlatched the catch with trembling hands, and opened it wide. The night air, laden with rain, hit my face like an icy bucket. Outside, the storm had intensified. Lightning illuminated the garden for seconds. Thunder masked Robert's banging on the door. The creak of the wood warned me that the door wouldn't hold much longer. Without giving myself time to think, I climbed onto the balcony railing and felt with my foot for a tree branch. It was wet and slippery, but it was that or die inside. I launched myself, clinging to the branch with both hands. The rough bark scratched my palms, but I held on. My soaked tunic caught on a thin branch. I pulled with all my might until I heard the sound of the fabric tearing. It didn't matter. The only important thing was to get down. Just as my feet finally touched the muddy grass of the garden, I heard a crash upstairs. Robert had broken down the bedroom door. I looked up and saw him in the doorway, bathed in the lit light. He ran to the balcony and leaned out, searching in the darkness, cursing loudly. I pressed myself against the tree trunk, holding my breath. A lightning flash illuminated the patio for a second. If he had looked down at that instant, he would have seen me. But the curtain of water made it difficult for him to see, and he furiously went back into the room, perhaps thinking I was still hiding there. I didn't lose a second. Barefoot, my feet sinking into the mud, I crept along the side wall of the house and headed for the back garden door, the one the gardener used. I knew that as soon as Robert discovered I wasn't in the room, he would search the entire house and then go looking for me. I had to put as much distance as possible between us before he woke the guards or called any of his contacts. Mr. Peterson had friends everywhere. I no longer knew who I could trust. Every shadow seemed like an enemy. Every tree trunk, a lurking figure. With my heart pounding and tears mixing with the rain on my face, I managed to open the small back door and step out onto the dark path that ran behind the estate. There was no one. I ran without looking back, the recorder clutched in my pocket, until I reached a main avenue about 2 miles away. My soaked phone in my pocket vibrated several times. I assumed it was Robert. I refused to answer. I couldn't give him the slightest clue of where I was. Taking shelter under the awning of a closed shop, gasping for breath, I pulled out my phone with fingers numb from the cold. I saw 10 missed calls from Robert. I ignored them and searched for a name in my contact list. Julian, my best friend since high school, the only person I could trust. An investigative journalist, stubborn and accustomed to dealing with dirty cases. I dialed his number with trembling hands, praying he wasn't asleep. It rang a couple of times, then I heard his hoarse, sleepy voice. "Clara, what happened?" I couldn't give too many explanations. My voice broken by tears, I barely managed to whisper, "Julian, help me." "Robert killed Harry. I'm near the petrol station on the road. Come get me. Don't ask anything now. Just come quickly." I hung up before he could react and turned off my phone so no one could track my location. I curled up in a dark corner next to the shop's metal curtain, hugging my knees, trembling with fear and cold, waiting for Julian to arrive before Robert found me. 15 minutes felt like 15 years. Every approaching car light made my heart stop for an instant, expecting to see Robert's black SUV. However, at last, an old gray sedan stopped in front of me. The passenger side window rolled down, and I saw Julian's worried face. I jumped up and got into the car without a word, slamming the door shut. I must have looked pathetic, soaked, covered in mud, a total mess. My hands scratched and my face pale as a ghost. Julian gave me a quick glance. He understood that things were serious and sped off without asking questions. Inside the car, the contrast of the heating made me shiver even more. It wasn't just cold, it was my body releasing adrenaline. Julian handed me his jacket from the back seat and covered my shoulders. He drove with one hand, while with the other he squeezed mine, trying to convey calm. I started to tell him everything, from Miss Thompson's call, the scene at the school, Robert's two-faced nature, to the recording hidden in Harry's teddy bear. Each word was like spitting broken glass. When I played the audio, he pulled the car over to the curb and listened carefully, his face transforming as Robert and Mr. Peterson's phrases came out of the small device. When it finished, he slammed the steering wheel in rage, cursing Robert and Peterson. Then he listened to the recording again, but this time with the cold mind of a journalist. He said it was very strong evidence, but also very dangerous. Mr. Peterson was no ordinary person. He had political influence, police contacts, and surely expensive lawyers. If we went to the local police station without further evidence, they could make the recorder disappear, or, worse, silence us before we opened our mouths. He decided to take me to a safe place, a small flat on the outskirts of the city that had belonged to his late uncle, a place that not even his family knew he still used occasionally. That apartment would become our refuge and operations center. On the way, Julian turned on the radio to break the oppressive silence. At first, traffic news played. Then the announcer interrupted with an urgent bulletin. The lifeless body of a woman has been found in the courtyard of a primary school on Dove Street. The victim has been identified as a teacher, initials T.R. The preliminary hypothesis points to a possible suicide, having thrown herself from the 3rd floor of the school building. I felt my blood stop circulating. I started screaming inside the car. "Miss Thompson, they killed her!" She was crying. "Robert and Mr. Peterson killed her, and now they say it was suicide." Guilt lashed me with a violence worse than any physical blow. If I had gone earlier, if I had tried to get her out of school with me, maybe she would still be alive. But I had left her there, alone, in front of those monsters. I cried, with my whole body hitting the car dashboard. Julian pulled over, turned off the engine, and hugged me tightly, letting me vent that impossible pain. In the midst of my crying, something inside me changed. The pain stopped crushing me and hardened into a cold, sharp determination. My tears dried. I separated from Julian and looked at the dark road ahead. I remembered Miss Thompson's gaze when she whispered, "Run." She couldn't have died in vain. Harry couldn't either. It wasn't enough for Robert and Peterson to go to jail. No. That would be too easy for them. They had to feel fear, helplessness, shame. They had to see their lives destroyed, just as they had destroyed mine. I looked at Julian with new resolve. I told him with a calmness that even scared me that I didn't just want legal justice. I wanted to ruin those men's lives to the roots, that they breathed the same terror they made Harry and Miss Thompson live. Julian held my gaze for a few seconds and nodded silently, accepting that dark pact between us. We decided not to go to the police yet. First, we needed more evidence, something so conclusive that neither influence nor lawyers could overturn it. The recording alone could be dismissed as a fabrication. We had to get the bottle of poison Robert had used to poison Harry, the physical proof of the crime. We were sure he wouldn't destroy it immediately out of vanity, overconfidence in his impunity, or simple carelessness. That night, in the dusty little flat, we stopped being victims and became hunters. I cut my hair to shoulder length, threw away my torn black dress, and put on simple clothes that had belonged to Julian's uncle. The submissive Clara, the docile wife, had died with my son. It was just dawning when we sat down to plan my return to the snake's nest, not as a repentant wife, but as a ghost coming to unearth their secrets. We knew that Robert worked as operations director in Mr. Peterson's Foundation corporate building. Every Friday, an external cleaning company did a deep clean of the offices. That would be my entry point. Julian, an expert at getting where he's not wanted, hacked the cleaning company's system and registered me on the temporary staff list with a false identity. He turned me into Sumi, a maintenance worker with a badge and uniform. In front of the bathroom mirror in the apartment, I tied a dark blue hijab, one of those practical ones worn by women who work long hours, and put on the light blue uniform, slightly large for me. I put on thick-rimmed glasses and powdered my face unevenly, dulling my features. The woman reflected was no longer Clara. It was someone else. Julian parked the car 2 blocks from the Foundation's corporate building. I got out of the car pushing a trolley with buckets, brooms, and mops, mingling with the rest of the cleaning staff entering through the service door. The guard barely looked at us. He didn't even look up to check our faces. Those at the bottom are invisible. I passed security control without a problem with the cloned card Julian had prepared from a careless employee's. I went up in the service elevator to the 12th floor, where Robert's office was located. The corridor was carpeted, silent, and cold. I pushed the trolley to the double door with the sign, Operations Director. I swiped the card through the reader. The light turned green, and the lock clicked. I entered. The office was spacious and elegant, with dark wood furniture and a large window overlooking part of the city. On the wall, behind the desk, hung a photograph of us, Robert, Harry, and me, smiling in a park. I wanted to tear it off with a claw. Robert hadn't hung that photo out of love, but as part of his mask as an exemplary family man. I knew, because I had accidentally seen it once, that behind an abstract painting on another wall was a hidden safe. I carefully removed the painting, and there was the digital panel. I swallowed. The code was Harry's date of birth. The irony churned my stomach. I dialed 0317, and the green light came on. I opened the safe, expecting to find the poison bottle. It wasn't there. There were stacks of pound notes, property documents in Robert's name, passports with different stamps, papers transferring Foundation land to private accounts. It was pure corruption, but it still didn't prove murder. I took photos with the small hidden camera in one of my buttons, one by one, leaving nothing unrecorded. Then I heard laughter and footsteps approaching down the hallway. Panic rose in me like a hot flush. I closed the safe, rehung the painting a little crooked from the haste, and hid behind a large sofa near the desk, pretending to clean the skirting board. The door opened. Robert entered with a well-dressed young woman in a fitted dress and high heels. It was Bethany, his secretary, whom I had always seen too close to him. They didn't notice my presence, protected by the height of the backrest and the shadow of a filing cabinet. What I heard next burned me inside. Robert did not seem like a grieving man. He laughed with Bethany as he poured whiskey into 2 glasses. She sat coquettishly on the edge of the desk and stroked his arm. They talked about Harry's death as if discussing the successful closing of a deal. Bethany told him that his performance at the funeral had been perfect, that even Mr. Peterson had been impressed with his fatherly grief. Robert prided himself, saying that getting rid of that sickly child had been the best thing for his future. He called him a nuisance, a source of expenses that prevented the inheritance money from flowing into his hands. I felt my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to come out and beat them to a pulp, but I knew I would lose. Instead, I activated the small recording microphone I carried in my trouser pocket and let every word of that conversation be recorded. They talked about a trip to Europe they planned to take when everything calmed down and the millions reached his account. They mocked me, my desperate escape. Robert said they would soon find my corpse lying somewhere, that everyone would believe I was crazy from grief. He called me weak, useless, without him. And there's nothing they can prove, he added, kissing Bethany's temple. I sent the poison bottle to be incinerated with the medical waste this morning. No trace was left. That phrase was a low blow. The bottle, our hope, no longer existed, but we obtained something equally powerful, an arrogant acknowledgement, the confession that they believed they had won. When they finally left for lunch, I waited several minutes in my hiding place until I was sure. Before leaving, I took out the toy car that Harry used to carry in his backpack, something I had saved since the night before, and left it in the middle of the desk, right on top of Robert's tidy files, so he would know that his past was coming for him. I returned to the apartment with Julian, and we listened to the recording together. Julian had to go out onto the balcony to smoke, so he wouldn't explode. He knew the audio was damning, but it was still the result of an illegal recording, and they could try to overturn it in court. We needed them to sink themselves publicly, to betray each other in front of witnesses, cameras, and microphones. The most effective way to make a criminal make mistakes is to instill fear in them. And we knew that Robert, however cold he might be, had a crack. The terror of the supernatural, of karma, of punishment for what he couldn't control. Years ago, when we were newly married, he had confessed to me that he was terrified of ghost stories, that he was obsessed with the idea that bad actions would return multiplied. He had tried to drown that fear in cynicism and money, but it was still there. Julian had managed to hack into our house's smart home system. Lights, cameras, audio, air conditioning, everything Robert installed to feel safe. We would use it to drive him crazy. That very night we began the harassment. From the laptop screen, we watched on the living room camera how he poured himself drink after drink, restlessly playing with Harry's toy car that someone had left on his office desk. At midnight, Julian made the living room lights at home flicker. Robert got up confused and went to check the switches. When he seemed to calm down, he went up to the bedroom. We lowered the air conditioning temperature to 16 degrees Celsius. We saw him uncover himself and shiver in bed. Then, through the ceiling speakers, we played a very soft giggle from Harry, mixed with the white noise of the fan. Robert sat up abruptly, his eyes wide, looking for the source of the sound. He asked aloud who was there. We cut the audio, repeated the game the following nights, gradually increasing the intensity. We never allowed him to sleep for more than a short while. On the third day, while he was showering, we filled the bathroom with the recording of Harry's whimpers when his stomach hurt, that fragment that had also been on the small recorder. The echo on the tiles made it sound ghostly. Robert came out of the bathroom slipping, clinging to the furniture, soaked and his face white as marble. He started screaming for them to leave him alone, that it wasn't possible. Blaming Bethany was his next step. He began calling her nervously, accusing her of playing cruel jokes. Distrust grew between them. The culmination of our plan coincided with the Foundation's gala, to be held at a luxury hotel. Mr. Peterson was to give a speech, and Robert would receive an award as an exemplary father for continuing to support the institution despite the tragedy. The title of the award turned my stomach. Julian found a loophole in the hotel's Wi-Fi network and accessed the projection and sound system. They planned an emotional video with photos of Harry. We prepared a very different one, a compilation of their own rottenness. On the night of the event, Julian and I watched everything from a van parked in the car park with several screens connected to the hotel's cameras. We saw Robert enter with Mr. Peterson. Robert looked distraught, haggard, stooped, turning his head constantly as if he feared encountering a ghost behind him. Bethany was also there, beautiful but upset, subjected to his mood swings. As Robert went up to the stage to receive the award, the audience applauded him. He took the microphone and began to talk about how much he missed his son, with the broken tone he had also rehearsed. I gave Julian the signal. The giant screen behind Robert, which was supposed to show an animation with Harry's smiling face, filled with white noise, and a sharp screech invaded the loudspeakers. Then, the image changed to an intense red background, and huge letters appeared as if written in blood. "I know what you did." The room fell into absolute silence. Robert turned, pale as a corpse. At that moment, we played the recording of his conversation with Bethany through the loudspeakers, the one where he called Harry a sickly child and boasted about having destroyed the poison bottle. The attendees gasped. Exclamations, chairs scraping, indignant murmurs were heard. Bethany stood up, swaying, about to faint. Mr. Peterson stood up, red with rage and shame. Robert tried to take control of the microphone, shouting that it was all a setup, that they were slandering him, but his voice was drowned in the wave of reproaches and camera flashes. The worst for him came when he saw Mr. Peterson murmur something to the head of security. He understood in a second that they planned to use him as a scapegoat, leaving him alone to public opinion to save the Foundation's image. "You," Robert shouted from the stage, pointing at Peterson. "You were the one who planned everything. The inheritance, the money split, the poison. If I fall, you fall with me." That accusation, captured by mobile phones and television cameras, would be impossible to erase. The gala turned into chaos. Robert escaped through the service exit, pursued by journalists. Peterson tried to control the situation, but the scandal had already erupted on social media. The video went viral in a matter of hours. However, we knew it wasn't enough. Lawyers could plead stress, delusion, a digital montage. We needed a clearer final scene with them themselves describing their crimes while someone officially listened. That night, we returned to the apartment without celebrating. We knew that a wounded animal is a dangerous animal. Robert was now a social pariah, but still free. Peterson was cornered, but with resources. The next phase of the plan consisted of pitting the two against each other, making them believe the other was betraying them. Julian prepared 2 disposable, untraceable phones. On one, we pretended to be Robert and texted Peterson, "I have signed copies of all the asset diversion papers. If you don't help me get out of the city tonight and give me my share, they will go to the prosecutor's office tomorrow. Meet me at the old Foundation warehouse at the port at 2 a.m., alone. Or we sink together." We knew Peterson was paranoid and wouldn't dare to ignore that threat. On the other phone, we pretended to be an emissary of Peterson and sent a message to Robert. "Mr. Peterson wants to fix this. He has prepared a speedboat to get you out of the country tonight. He wants you to bring all the documents and evidence you have to destroy them. He's waiting for you at 2 a.m. at the old Foundation warehouse at the port. The police are already moving. It's now or never. Don't be late." Robert, desperate, without allies, and convinced that everyone was after him, would see that message as his last lifeline. At 2 a.m., under a fierce rain, Julian and I were already inside the warehouse, on a metal mezzanine on the 2nd floor, with a perfect view of the main space. It was a large, abandoned building near the docks. It smelled of rust and stale sea. Julian had placed hidden cameras and microphones connected to a secure server, which a contact of his in the Serious Crimes Unit would also have access to. This time, the police were aware. They knew that 2 dangerous men would meet there to talk about dirty money. They just had to wait for them to say enough and then go in. A black sedan arrived first. We saw Peterson get out with a briefcase and 2 bodyguards. He left them outside, telling them to wait. He entered the warehouse with his right hand inside his jacket. It wasn't hard to imagine he was holding a gun. His face was stone, tensed by rage and fear. Minutes later, the door creaked again. Robert entered from the darkness. His shirt was wrinkled, his gaze lost. He looked 10 years older in 2 days. He walked towards Peterson with a mixture of hope and hatred. "Where's the speedboat?" he asked, his voice broken. "You said you'd get me out of here." Peterson let out a dry laugh. "Speedboat? Do you really think that after what you did at the hotel I'm going to help you escape? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You're a nuisance." Robert looked at him in disbelief. "But you sent me a message." "I didn't send you anything," Peterson interrupted. "The only message I received was yours, threatening with the documents. Did you bring them? Give them to me, and maybe I'll consider that your corpse appears complete, not in bags." Robert's confusion turned into fury. He understood that someone else was pulling the strings, but his hatred for Peterson was stronger than his survival instinct. "So you're going to kill me like we killed Harry?" he spat. "Go ahead. But remember that you're as responsible as I am. You got me the poison. You told me to increase the dose. You did it to cover your gambling debts. Don't you dare point fingers at me," Peterson roared. "You were the father. You put the poison in his mouth every night. I just told you to sort out the inheritance." "Don't play the saint, you hypocritical old man," Robert shouted. "We're the same garbage." Every word was recorded by the microphones and transmitted live to Julian's police contact. There was no room for interpretation. They were admitting their involvement in a child's murder and the diversion of funds. Suddenly, Peterson pulled out his gun and pointed it at Robert's head. "It's over. Goodbye, useless." Before he could shoot, police sirens broke the night silence. Red and blue lights filtered through the cracks in the warehouse. A voice over a megaphone ordered them to drop their weapons and surrender. Peterson started, looking towards the entrance. Robert took advantage of the distraction and lunged at him. The two rolled on the floor. The gun flew into a corner, out of reach of both. From our hiding place, we watched the brutal fight. Robert, younger and stronger, hit Peterson again and again until he was unconscious, but he had no intention of surrendering. He got up, staggering, and looked around for an exit. His eyes rose to the mezzanine where we were. A glint from the camera lens betrayed our presence. Our eyes met. For the first time since I fled home, Robert saw me. The blue hijab had come loose, revealing my face. His features contorted into a grimace of absolute hatred. "Clara!" he roared, finally recognizing the ghost that haunted him. Crazed, he rushed up the stairs, ignoring the shouts of the police who were already entering through another door. Julian grabbed my arm. "Run!" he told me, through the roof door. We went out onto the warehouse roof, under a torrential rain. The wind almost knocked us over. From there, we could see the dock and some patrol cars below. On the other side of the building was a metal emergency ladder that led down to a jetty. We headed towards it, but the roof door flew open with a kick. Robert appeared with a metal bar in his hand, bleeding from his head, his eyes wide. Julian stepped in, trying to stop him. Robert struck him brutally on the arm with the bar. I heard a horrible crunch. Julian fell to the ground, screaming in pain, clutching his dangling arm. I ran towards him, but Robert grabbed my hijab and pulled me back. I felt my scalp burn with pain. He dragged me towards the edge of the roof, using me as a shield when he saw several police officers trying to climb up from the other side. "One more step and I'll throw her," he shouted, pressing the bar against my neck. The officers stopped. The rain soaked us all. I breathed with difficulty, feeling the cold metal at my throat, but I was no longer afraid as before. I was fed up. Robert forced me down the emergency stairs with him. We reached an old SUV parked between containers. Surely stolen. He pushed me into the passenger seat, tied my hands to the roof handle with his own tie, and sat behind the wheel. He started like a madman, knocking down the fence and speeding onto the avenue with several patrol cars behind us. The police cars followed us with sirens wailing. Robert drove as if he valued neither his life nor mine. He ran red lights, crashed into other cars' mirrors, drove through puddles that made us skid dangerously. I hit the door with my shoulder, trying to free myself, but the tie was too tight. "You won't escape," I said, my voice hoarse. "Not anymore." "Shut up," he mumbled. "I'm not going to be poor again. I'm not going to rot in jail. We're going far away." "Do you understand, Clara? Far away. He took an elevated viaduct that was under construction. The ground was slippery from the rain, and the road narrowed due to cement blocks. Further ahead, flashes of patrol cars cutting us off could be seen. Robert sharply turned the wheel to avoid the barricade, but the car lost traction. The world spun several times. The vehicle skidded, hit the retaining wall sideways, and crashed. The airbags deployed. I felt a dull impact on my head and a burning pain in my temple. Dazed, I distinguished Robert next to me, bleeding from his nose, one leg trapped between the remnants of the dashboard. Even so, he kept moving. He stumbled out of the door and dragged me out, holding me by the wrists. Outside, the rain continued to fall mercilessly. He pulled me towards the edge of the viaduct, where only a few steps separated us from the void. Below, the dark current of an urban river roared. Several patrol cars surrounded the vehicle, pointing their weapons at us. Robert pressed a piece of broken glass to my neck, right over the carotid artery. I felt the sharp tip cut my skin, and a thin stream of warm blood ran down my collarbone. The police shouted for him to calm down, to let me go. The negotiator spoke through a megaphone, trying to buy time. Robert, delirious, demanded a helicopter, money, a clear route. It was absurd. He knew he had no way out, but he clung to that fantasy like a drowning man to a branch. I heard him breathe heavily right behind me, the glass pressing against my throat. And yet, at that moment, my mind filled with a strange serenity. I stopped trembling. I saw his reflection in a puddle. The man I had loved was unrecognizable, consumed by ambition and fear. I thought of Harry, his small body, the coffin, Miss Thompson, falling from the 3rd floor of the school. They had had no alternative. I still had one. I quickly glanced down at his feet. Robert's right leg was visibly damaged. The torn trouser fabric revealed deep wounds, blood mixed with dirty water. That was his weak point. I gathered all the strength I had left. I took a deep breath, not caring if the glass cut a little deeper. Suddenly, I turned my head back and bit his forearm that held the glass with all the accumulated rage. I sank my teeth into his flesh until I tasted blood. Robert let out a heart-rending shriek. By reflex, he loosened his hand, and the glass slipped from his fingers. Without losing a second, I raised my leg and kicked him with all my might in the damaged knee. A horrible crack sounded. Robert's scream was even sharper than the previous one, an almost inhuman howl. His body lost balance, and he fell sideways onto the soaked pavement, writhing in pain. I jumped away, stumbling, but now out of his grasp. The police took advantage of the confusion. Several officers ran towards us and pulled me out of the way, moving me away from the edge of the bridge. Others lunged at Robert, who kicked and struggled, trying to grab anything. One of the policemen had to shoot him in the other leg when he tried to snatch his weapon. Everything became confused. Voices, lights, hands. They sat me on the ground, wrapped me in a thermal blanket. A paramedic pressed gauze over the wound on my neck. I said nothing. I just watched as they lifted Robert onto a stretcher, handcuffed, bleeding, disfigured. As he passed me, our eyes met again. There was no longer arrogance, superiority, or hatred. Only pure fear. Perhaps for the first time, he understood that everything was over. Julian appeared shortly after, his arm in a sling, his face bruised. He approached as best he could and put his good arm around me. At that moment, I finally allowed myself to cry. But my tears were no longer just of pain, they were also of relief. The next day, the news spoke in detail about the network of corruption and murder involving Robert and Mr. Peterson. Fragments of the recordings, images of the scandal at the gala, and photos of both of them handcuffed were leaked. Public opinion turned against them. The Crown Prosecution Service took action. Bank accounts were frozen, their assets seized. However, the legal punishment was only part of the reckoning. Life, or fate, took care of the rest. In the prison hospital where Robert was admitted, doctors discovered that the leg shattered in the accident had become severely infected. The combination of glass, mud, and asphalt debris had introduced bacteria into his bloodstream. Within hours, the tissue began to necrotize. To save his life, They had no choice but to amputate his right leg above the knee. Upon waking from the anesthesia, Robert discovered he would never walk again as before. He cried, screamed, pleaded for what he had lost to be returned. It was a brutal irony. The one who had destroyed his own son's body, damaging his organs with poison, now saw his own body mutilated. In the hospital bed, confined to a wheelchair, the same person who believed himself invincible, who despised the weak, found himself forever transformed into what he most despised. Mr. Peterson did not escape unscathed either. During his first formal statement at the prosecutor's office, the tension caused his blood pressure to skyrocket. He suffered a massive stroke. He survived, but half of his body was paralyzed. The man who dominated stages with moving speeches, who manipulated politicians and businessmen with his eloquence, was reduced to uttering unintelligible sounds, drooling, confined to a prison infirmary bed. His assets were confiscated. His family disowned him out of shame. He became dependent on others, even for eating and using the toilet. It was the total ruin of his pride. Bethany, Robert's secretary and lover, tried to flee. She was arrested at the airport attempting to leave the country with jewels and cash. Before the investigators, she betrayed Robert without a second thought, providing records of transfers and compromising emails. She believed this would reduce her sentence, but she could not evade her responsibility for collaborating in the cover-up and benefiting from the money. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In prison, far from expensive suits and luxury hotels, her beauty ceased to be a privilege and became a target of envy and aggression. Julian and I followed the news with a mixture of satisfied rage and exhaustion. We never celebrated their suffering, but we also felt no pity. Nothing that happened to them came close to the pain of a child poisoned by his own father, or the terror of a teacher thrown from a third floor for telling the truth. However, at least they were no longer untouchable. One day I received a call from the prison hospital asking me to expand my testimony. As I walked down the guarded corridor, I saw Robert through a small window, sitting in a wheelchair. He was barely a shadow of the man he once was, thinner, older, with a lost gaze. When he realized I was there, he slowly turned his head. Our gazes crossed once more. He began to cry silently. His lips moved, trying to form words I couldn't hear. Apologies, perhaps. Tears that came too late. For the first time, I felt no hatred. Only a serene emptiness, an unbreakable distance. I looked at him for a few seconds, long enough for him to understand that I was still standing, that I had survived everything he tried to destroy. Then I turned and continued on my way. I had nothing more to say to him. 6 months passed since that stormy night on the viaduct. Time, though slow, began to heal wounds. Scars remained, but they no longer bled. One clear sky morning, I looked at myself in the mirror of my new house, smaller and simpler than the previous one, but full of peace. I put on a soft cream hijab and smoothed the fabric with firm hands. The woman in the mirror was no longer the mother who could barely stand at her son's funeral. She was someone hardened by tragedy, yes, but also raised above it. Beside me, behind, in the reflection, I saw Julian pass with a stack of papers and crack a silly joke to lighten the mood. That day, the final sentence would be read. In the crowded courtroom, filled with journalists, representatives of children's associations, and curious onlookers, the atmosphere was thick. I sat in the front row. Julian, in a suit and with his arm fully recovered, settled next to me and took my hand. Then the judges entered, and the murmurs ceased. 2 officers pushed Robert's wheelchair to the defendant's bench. He hung his head. The adjacent bench was empty. Peterson's lawyer represented him because the old man could no longer move. Beyond, in another chair, Bethany trembled, pale. The prosecutor firmly reviewed all charges: aggravated homicide against a minor, murder of a key witness, corruption, money laundering. The presiding judge, a middle-aged woman with stern eyes, began to read the verdict. The room fell into reverent silence. Her words, though formal, had the force of a stone thrown into water. She declared Robert guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt, emphasizing the cruelty and premeditation of his actions, and handed down the maximum penalty: life imprisonment. Gasps, exclamations, a barely contained "thank goodness," were heard from the back of the room. Robert began to tremble. He broke into a dreadful, desperate sob that moved no one. Mr. Peterson was given a life sentence without possibility of parole. The judge noted that, although ill, his moral and legal responsibility was absolute. His broken body would spend the rest of his remaining years in a prison infirmary bed. Bethany was sentenced to 20 years in prison. When the judge struck the gavel 3 times, I felt something inside me finally close. The legal chapter had concluded. As I left the courthouse, the fresh street air tasted different. It wasn't absolute freedom, because nothing would bring Harry back to me. But it was a first step towards a life where my son was not just a victim, but also a seed of something good. All the money involved in my father's inheritance and in Robert and Peterson's schemes was recovered after a long legal process in which Julian worked tirelessly. The state intended to keep a good portion, but we managed to prove that it was Harry's patrimony. Still, I was clear that I couldn't keep that money for myself. I saw it stained with blood. I decided to turn it into something that would honor my son. We found an old building on the outskirts of the city and completely renovated it. At the entrance, we hung a colorful sign, Harry's House, Children's Protection and Education Foundation. I wanted that place to be a refuge for abused, neglected, or abandoned children, those whom no one believed or listened to. A place where they could sleep without fear, study, play, have psychologists, teachers, and affection. I walked through the freshly painted corridors, adorned with children's drawings. In the courtyard, a group of children played football. Others took turns on the swings. Their laughter resonated like a gentle echo in my chest. In the main hall, we hung a large photograph of Harry smiling, and next to it, one of Miss Thompson. With part of the money, we also financed the renovation of the school where she had worked, including a new library called the Miss Thompson Library, so that her name would be linked to education and not to tragedy. As evening fell, when the sun began to color the sky orange, Julian and I went to the cemetery. Harry's and Miss Thompson's graves were next to each other, under the shade of a frangipani, a tree with very fragrant white flowers that leaned protectively over them. The grass was green and well kept, adorned with fresh flowers that anonymous people left from time to time. I knelt before Harry's headstone, running my fingers over his name engraved in the marble. This time, there was not the despair of before in my eyes. There was nostalgia, yes, but mixed with a new peace. "It's done, my love," I whispered. "Justice has been served. They won't hurt anyone again. Your money now helps other children stay safe. You no longer have to feel pain. You can play all you want up there." The wind gently moved the branches of the tree, and some white petals fell on the grave. I closed my eyes and prayed long and deeply, offering God my gratitude, my grief, and my son's entire life. When I finished, I stood up. It was then that I saw something at the end of the gravel path. About 10 meters away, in the golden light of the sunset, the silhouette of a child stood out. He was wearing pajamas with Harry's favorite superhero drawing, the same outfit I put on him the last night he spent at home. His hair was ruffled, and his eyes were bright as always. He didn't look sick or tired. On the contrary, he radiated health and joy. I felt no fear. He looked at me with a huge smile, so luminous it almost hurt. He raised his right hand and waved to me with a small gesture. A goodbye. And "I'm okay, Mum." I felt a single tear slide down my cheek. I waved back with a trembling hand and a smile that, for the first time in a long time, was sincere. "See you soon, darling," I murmured. Harry's figure gradually blurred with the setting sun until it disappeared. But the warmth it left in my chest remained. He was at peace. I could finally accept that I would not hug him again, but also that he was not suffering. I turned. Julian was waiting a few steps behind me, asking no questions, with that silent patience he had always had with me. He extended his hand. I took it firmly. We left the cemetery walking side by side, leaving behind us years of pain, fear, and guilt. In front of me, the city lit up its lights one by one, as if a new curtain was opening. I had a whole life ahead of me, full of children who would need protection, of stories that deserved to be heard, of wounds that I might be able to help heal. I was no longer just the mother who lost her son, nor the betrayed wife. I was Clara, the woman who went through the storm and remained standing, founder of Harry's house and defender of children who have no voice. And for the first time in a long time, when thinking about the future, I could say silently, yes,